Way to a Wonderful Life. And our Way to a Wonderful Life message for today is titled, Invisible Supply Made Visible. Invisible Supply Made Visible. You know, when we go back to the Lord's Prayer, which Jesus gave us as the key to life, we can read, you give us this day our daily bread. You give us this day our daily bread. And that bread symbolizes supply. The supply for everything that we need, all the requirements of life, but not only just the necessities, but the things that fulfill our good desires so that we can enjoy this thing called life and we can appreciate this gift of life in a greater way. And so many people run around thinking that life is a test, and they become tested. Believe me, tested over and over and over again. But we start putting it into our mind the truth that God has given us this life as a gift, and start feeling gifted, then all manner of good gifts of the Spirit come flowing into our life if we let it. Let's look at these words from the great American mystic, healer, and teacher, Joel Goldsmith. This is from his book, Invisible Supply. He writes, the principle of supply is that in our oneness with God, we already have all that the Father has, because I and the Father are one, and all that the Father has is mine. If we individually are experiencing a lack, it is not because of any actual lack. It is because of our inability to make contact with our supply. It is because of our inability to make contact with our supply. And how do we do that? He says, in my writings, you have seen the reminder that throughout the Great Depression, there was no lack in this country. If anything, there was a greater abundance than ever before. Certainly, there was a greater abundance of crops, of fish in the oceans, birds in the air, lumber in the forest, grains in the warehouses, in barns and in fields and in gardens. This great abundance was not only omnipresent in God, it was actually omnipresent in storehouses and warehouses, in barns and in fields. There was no lack. If any of us suffered from a lack or insufficiency, it was not because there was an actual condition of lack. It was because we were not in tune with the source of supply. We did not have access to the infinite supply. So therefore, we must become in tune with the source of supply first, each and every one of us. And in tune with the source of supply means that we must become in tune with the infinite, with God, the giver of all good things, the great invisible that makes all things visible through the mind of mankind, as we allow this movement of the Spirit, intelligence, and the power of God to flow through us. And just accept the ideas that come to us and let those opportunities be made visible so that we can realize that greater life, that more abundant life, that more joyful life. Joel Goldsmith is telling us a great truth. There is a great abundance at hand all around us, no matter where we may be. How we see ourselves in relationship to this abundance will always determine how much of it is available for our own personal use. And for the majority of us, this relationship is established in great part by our relationship with God, Infinite Spirit. There is no happiness that is greater than the realization that we have connected with God, and through this connection, we have created through our consciousness the answer to our prayers. Through this connection, we have created through our consciousness the answer to our prayers. Just imagine that. Just imagine that each and every time something happens in your life, as you say, I know that God is present with me, that God is giving this to me, that God is making all things necessary, creating for me a path of abundance and success and happiness and health and all good things. Just recognize God. The first step in all prayer is the recognition that there's a power greater than we are. And in this great invisible that we call God, in this infinite presence that we call God, is all things good, all things good. Let's look at this wisdom from one of the great writers of the 18th century. This is titled Demonstrating Supply. It must be remembered that what Jesus did is within the reach of anyone who attains the same degree of spiritual understanding. In feeding the multitude, walking on water, healing the sick, and raising the dead, he was proving the allness of spirit, the allness of God. That spiritual law is the law of annihilation to the false beliefs opposed to God, as manifested through human consciousness. Jesus established the fact of one consciousness, the consciousness of spirit, the consciousness of God, and in this consciousness there can be no scarcity, no object or thing through which it can operate, and no law to support or sustain a claim of scarcity or lack. Jesus established the fact that the belief about gravitation could not operate as a law to prevent him from being where he ought to be. He proved the omnipresence of infinite life. He proved that individual life could not be destroyed because it is the manifestation of everlasting life, God. In other words, our spirit is eternal. Our human body has a life expectancy to it. It has a time that it will no longer be useful for us, and we'll go on into the next incarnation, whatever that may be, heaven or hell or whatever it is that we imagine the next life to be, because it's going to be done into us as we believe. And that's the truth here, and then the hereafter, and the hereafter that. So he proved that individual life could not be destroyed because it is the manifestation of everlasting life, which is God. So we're all a part of God. That's what Jesus is telling us. We're a part of God. You are in God. God is in you. That God so loved us that God created a part of itself and incarnated that within each and every one of us. Each and every one of us have intelligence, we have power, we have mind, we have spirit, so we can think, we can create, we can objectify things, so we know that we're part of this intelligence that created all that we see, and this intelligence that permeates everything in the universe in which we live. So let's go on with this wisdom. When Jesus' disciples would send the multitude away because of their belief in the lack of food, he took what they had, fed the 5,000 to the extent of their needs, and gathered up the remnants, or the leftovers, even more than the original supply at hand. You must understand, just as Jesus did, that this material world and the material body are beliefs. Mind and spirit, which is God, is the only true substance and the only true supply, and that this supply is infinite and omnipresent. The idea of God as infinite, omnipresent supply appeals to us because it is our instinctive desire as God's idea, made into flesh, to have and to possess it. We seek God and we find mankind because mankind is idea reflecting spirit, the mind of God. We would not find mankind by seeking mankind, and so while your instinctive desire for supply is natural, we cannot find supply by seeking it in the material world. We must get supply by seeking God or spirit as we find God and spirit, and then we shall have the substance or the supply of whatever it is that we desire. It has no relationship to materiality and cannot be associated with it in any way because supply is idea. So this idea is not the idea of or about something. It is the fact that God's mind expresses God's infinite being in ideas. Ideas are imperishable, tangible, present, and real. Even from a human standpoint, ideas are everywhere all of the time. To illustrate, 2 times 2 is 4 where you are now. You may make a long journey to China. You do not have to send 2 times 2 is 4 there for your use upon arrival. It is there now before you start, and it will be there upon your return. The divine fact is that supply is idea and divine mind. It is infinite, imperishable, tangible, real, and present. It is where you, God's loving expression, are all the time. You have it now, but you must claim it. That's why Jesus said, seek and you shall find, ask and you shall receive, knock on the door of your consciousness, and it shall be opened unto you. We must claim it. Our understanding and application of that divine fact operates as an immutable law upon the human sense of mind and body and fear and doubt and anxiety, lest your supply become limited and exhausted, and exhausted it will abate. You are demonstrating supply. You are proving that science reverses the false testimony of the physical senses, and by this reversal, mortals arrive at the fundamental facts of being. Mortals arrive at the fundamental facts of being. So let's think about what she's telling us. 2 times 2 equals 4. That is both invisible and is visible, is it not? We can see 2 times 2 equals 4 in the visible world, and we can see it in the invisible. We don't have to say, oh, well, show me how 2 times 2 equals 4. We know that 2 times 2 equals 4. It's a known idea. It's a known fact. It's a known truth. And the fact that it's invisible and it's the same all throughout the world, just like the law of gravity, which is also invisible, tells us and shows us that God's good, God's universal love for mankind is everywhere present. It's everywhere present. 2 times 2 equals 4. God, infinite presence, intelligence, power, moving through the minds of mankind, brings us into that realization that we can have those greater things still, and those greater things still are available to all of us, no matter who we may be or where we may be. So we just realize and just take that into our mind as the truth. The truth for you and the truth for me and the truth for everyone. Let's go back to Joel Goldsmith, the great American healer and teacher. He says, the principal supply is that in our oneness with God, we already have all that the Father has, because I and the Father are one, and all that the Father has is mine. If we individually are experiencing a lack, it is not because of any actual lack, it is because of our inability to make contact with our supply. So that's why Jesus said, keep your mind stayed on God, stayed on the good, and all good things will be added into you. Keep your mind stayed on God, not on the physical world. Don't look out into the world, because in the world you'll see evidence of lack and limitation. You'll see evidence of dis-ease and illnesses. You'll see evidence of poverty. You'll see evidence of hate and distrust and ignorance and fear. You look out into the world, you'll see all those things. So look to God. Change your mind about what you believe about life and start believing that God has gifted us with this thing called life to enjoy it, to live in harmony and peace and live in the loving embrace of God. So many times we lose that connection with God because our mind becomes so fastened to the things of the world. You know, there's all kinds of things trying to get our attention in the world. There's the worldly religions. There's the worldly politics. There's all these things that are trying to get our attention, all the things that are trying to cause us to lose sight of the fact that there's always something greater going on when we recognize that great invisible, which we call God, that great intelligence and power and spirit, has given us a part of its nature. So it's a natural thing for us to understand and to know that as we turn to God, as we turn to this invisible supply, our supply can be made visible. You give us this day our daily bread, and that bread, once again, symbolizes the good life, the joyful life, the successful life. We must take it into our mind that our consciousness aligned with the truth, our consciousness in tune with the infinite, will draw to us those greater things. All that we need. We want to be healthier. Look to God for your health. It may guide you and direct you to doctors and medicine and hospitals and clinics, but it will see your health restored. Look to God for your wealth. It may cause you to take on something that you've never taken on before. It may open a door of opportunity to a job, to a career, to a way of receiving money and compensation that you've never realized before. Go back and realize that all the good things that Jesus was teaching us were for our good. You know, people say, oh, as you sow, so shall you reap. And they try to make that a negative, but it's a law of compensation. So as we sow into our mind that God does give us gives to us unconditionally. God loves us unconditionally. God heals us, prospers us, and blesses us unconditionally. That the love of God is a powerful thing. That love, like 2 times 2 equals 4, is the same everywhere, everywhere. We should never doubt it. And as we take that into our mind, then we can realize that there's something greater going on within our own consciousness than anything that we can see in the world around us. That greater love of the Spirit moves through us, will move through us as ideas, will move through us as energy, as health. To feel the joy of life is to feel alive to life. To feel the joy of life is to feel the enthusiasm of life. And to feel the enthusiasm of life, we want to see that invisible supply made visible so that we can enjoy all that the Father has prepared for us. All that the Father hath is mine, Jesus said. But we must choose those things which we are to experience and to enjoy. So let's realize that there's a power within us to choose. There's a power within us to accept and to receive. There's a power within us to know that the great invisible, that all that matters to each and every one of us on an individual level is our connection with the power, the intelligence, and the Spirit of God. So the great Emerson said, what lies behind you and what lies in front of you pales in comparison to what lies inside of you. It's up to us to realize that once we make a decision, everything in the universe, all the principles and the laws and the energies of the great invisible that we call God causes this thing to happen. But we must make the decision to live the good life, an abundant life, and the joyful life. Jesus said, I have come to tell you that you may have life, and you may have it abundantly. But so many people strongly believe in lack. They strongly believe in poverty. They strongly believe in struggle. They strongly believe that life is a test. So they get tested over and over and over again. So let's start putting it into our mind. Life is a gift. And I am gifted with this thing called life. I am gifted to the point of realization that all that I need is more of God in my consciousness, the more of God's goodness, the more of God's greatness. So let's go back to Goldsmith. He tells us, in the Great Depression, there was no lack in this country. If anything, there was a greater abundance than ever before. Certainly there was a greater abundance of crops, of fish in the oceans, birds in the air, lumber in the forests, grains in the warehouses, and barns and in fields and gardens. This great abundance was not only omnipresent in God, it was actually omnipresent in storehouses and warehouses and barns and in fields. There was no lack. If any of us suffered from a lack or insufficiency, it was not because there was an actual condition of lack. It was because we were not in tune with the source of supply, so we did not have access to the infinite supply. In other words, the belief. People were mesmerized into believing in lack and limitation. People were mesmerized into believing in poverty. Just as now the politicians and the media mesmerize us into believing all manner of things that aren't true, all manner of things that are false, all manner of things that not only diminish the Spirit of God's love within us, but diminish the love of God in the world in which we live. So it is through reasoning in our mind that we arrive at an acceptance of a higher truth. Even the primitive people of ancient times realized that we must use the intelligence of God within our mind to reason ourselves out of every dilemma back to the truth that with God, we are free to accept, we are free to believe, and we are free to receive the good desires of our heart. For a short while, a few years ago, the prayer of Jabez was very popular, but like so many things in our modern culture, time becomes the enemy to so many, and they have ceased to use this amazing statement of principle to condition their mind for the larger and the greater experience of life. We've Remember, Jabez called upon the God of Israel. And what is the God of Israel? In the Bible, Israel stands for the human race, the God of the human race, the God of humanity. And even in that primitive time, Jabez realized that God was his source, that infinite supply came from God. That the prayer is, oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my border, and that your hand might be with me, and that you would keep me from harm, so that it might not bring me pain. Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my border, and that your hand might be with me, and that you would keep me from harm, so that it might not bring me pain. And God granted what he asked. We can read that in 1 Chronicles 4:10 in the Old Testament of the Holy Bible. We each have a prayer within us of a similar nature. Why? Because the idea of God as infinite, omnipresent supply appeals to us because it is our instinctive desire, as is God's idea, to have it and to possess it. So we each can connect with this invisible supply with faith and persistence. We can because others have, and what one can do, all can do, just as 2 times 2 equals 4 everywhere. And so it is. Amen. So once again, I want to thank you for being with us.